And speaking of that, it's been a little more than 3 weeks since the rail strike for CN ended. A week-long disagreement, you could call it that, between the rail company and its union, the Teamsters Canada. It hurt the overall country's rail capacity. CN Rail now says operations are back to normal. JJ Ruest is president and CEO of CN Rail. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Amanda.
So back to normal in relatively quick time. Give me just a sense of what that means. Volumes are where they would normally be right now?
So volumes are where they would be, pre-strike. The key indicator like velocity, network capacity, all of those likes are back to normal running rate. And the key commodities like grain and the major natural resources are moving also at a good pace. So right now, in fact, we have capacity to spare to move more product.
Because we heard from some of your some of the biggest folks who use the system that it would take more than, it wasn't just a switch going back on. It would take them some time, weeks, in fact, in some cases, to work down their inventories. Where are they in that process?
So this is where you get to segment by segment. The port business, for example, is fairly current, both East Coast and West Coast. The grain business, it's a matter at this point of how much sales there is, mostly in Vancouver, because the Port of Thunder Bay is going to close very shortly. How much sales are taking place, and also whether the grain growers want to sell at the current market price. So this week we took all the orders, and the next week we'd like to get more orders. We call all of our grain companies and ask them if they have more orders, meaning if they can buy more grain from the grain growers, we would love to do that as well. Some segment, namely, for example, lumber from BC, we might be a bit of a backlog because now you're getting into a specialized fleet. In that specialized fleet, those cycles are typically 30 days, and once the cars are gone to the U.S., it takes a while for them to come back. But we've recovered in normal terms. Winter is coming. Winter operation always more challenging, but right now, at the current temperature, we can run very well.
When you say you have spare capacity, which sector would that be most clear to you that you could be doing more? Is it grain?
Well, short term, for example, we've had major capital program the last 2 years in Western Canada between Edmonton and the U.S. border. So we have lots of track capacity out west. We also have a number of employees who are on temporary layoff, train crews that we love to bring back to do more crude by rail, for example. January 1's coming in, the Alberta government will start to convert some of their contract that was the NDP had signed to potential private sectors, and we will be in position to exercise to meet that demand as that demand starts to come back.
I was going to ask you about that. Crude by rail obviously had been seen as a great relief to the bottlenecks.
Yes.
Is it still a competition between your grain customers versus crude by rail, or do you have the capacity to meet all of this demand if we do see it continue?
So it was never a competition between the two. The role of the railroad, and CN is a growth company, right? We're focused on growth, so we're looking for any market that can allow us to grow the company, whether grain or crude or forest products or mining or consumers product for intermodal. So the last 2 years, we've made major capital investment out west. We've reinvested 25 cents of every revenue dollar in 2018 and 2019. So with the slowdown in the manufacturing segment, since last summer, we actually have capacity to spare. So we should be able to meet all the demand that grain has or crude by rail has. We actually hope that both of them will have a good first quarter, and it would be actually helpful to our own network as well.
You did say, and not surprisingly, that the strike would have an effect on your profit outlook. What are you telling investors about where that will end and what you're doing to mitigate against it?
Yeah. So we had a press release, and we said an impact was about 15 cents of EPS on the quarter. The impact of that, I think, definitely by the time the quarter is in, the impact will all be digested. And, as we said in the press release today, we feel that we actually are back to normal operation, especially heading into Christmas. Typically, next week, because of the holiday, is a slow week for the railroad. So if there's any market where it hasn't recovered by then, if our customers are open, we'll be able to move their freight.
You still await ratification of the contract with the Teamsters. Is that all going as you would hope it to go? No fear that it goes awry?
So right now it's a quiet period, meaning the Teamsters leadership is moving around the country. It's not like you just have one plant and you can do one meeting. They go from coast to coast, meet our employee and explain the deal that they've done. And I think the target is to have a secret vote sometime around January 20th. To get the result of, but the deal that took place at the table, was a fair deal for both parties. That's why both parties did it. It was basically agreed by both sides. So I'm assuming the union leadership will convince our members, our employee to to ratify the deal. But we'll know that late January.
One of the issues that was surfaced during the strike was this question of safety. There was a question of fatigue of some operators. What are you doing to make sure that none of that does actually go on inside the network?
So a number of things were raised during the union during the negotiation in public. Whether or not they were relevant to what's happening at the table is another issue, but safety is critical. We're always focused on safety. Right now, people I think may know that the Minister of Transport, Mr. Garneau, actually has a process to review fatigue ruling for railroads right now, and we very much support that he update the regulation and maybe make some change. And we hope all these changes will go in place in 2020, such that next time we renew a contract, these issues don't really come to the negotiating table. They're actually regulated by some new improvement on the fatigue regulation for rail.
You'll no doubt bring an individual bias, a corporate bias to this question, but the strike raised the issue of how important these services are to the whole economy, not just to the company investors. Should it be deemed an essential services? Is that something you talk to government about, to the minister, or at least should there be some binding arbitration situation that avoids a strike?
So CN has about 51% of all the track network in Canada. So obviously we're very, very important to the economy. We were always very important to the economy. And sometime the public forget that. But I think during that work stoppage in fact, it was 9 days, 8 days of track, 1 day before coming back. I think everybody was reminded again of the relevance of what the railroad do, especially CN, the Canadian economy. So the Canadian regulation, the essential services is more related to safety, but I think, which is basically the way the law is written today. So the question is really, I think the strike showed that we're definitely essential to the economy, and at some point that's for the elected official to decide, the right of the few versus the right of the many. So this was really why our work stoppage was so public, because we're so critical to the Canadian economy.
In other words, that's a part of the conversation that you expect to continue?
I think it's a part of conversation the federal government needs to continue and decide where is it that they want to, kind of make the decision, the draw between the right of the few versus the right of the many. And that's why, again, the strike was so public, because of the impact we have on the economy, on the farmers, on the mining industry, manufacturing sector, and port business.
All right, we need to leave there. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
JJ Ruest is President and CEO of CN Rail.